Yeah, thanks, it's a good question. Andrew?
I think it's certainly true, reading Italian Renaissance comedies compared to English Renaissance comedies, that there is a great deal more comfort with representing homoeroticism and homosexual practices on the Italian stage than there is on the English stage. When Shakespeare rewrites Lelia Giannetti, Lelia's kiss is written out of the play. And yet, at the same time, we have at least a great deal more evidence of brutal repression of sodomy in Italy at the time than there is in England.
Oh, yeah.
And those two things have always seemed to, not be flipped or not go together. And I just wondered if you have any thoughts about those relationships.
Yeah, I talk a lot about this in my 4th chapter. And you are absolutely right. This is a very important aspect that we have to consider. You see this divide. You read literary text like comedies where sodomy and homoerotic practices are presented pretty much positively. And you read also some humanistic texts, several, poetry and prose, where also there is a very positive vision. Actually, it's the only love possible. The love between women and men doesn't count. It's like for making children. But the real noble love, if you read a lot of humanistic, poetry like Hermaphroditus and many others, it's the very, the real noble, etc. Okay, so you have all this. Then you have, looking at other texts, you have texts that condemn harshly any idea of homoerotic practice, or texts like Ficino, where they disguise, in the Neoplatonic love, this all the discourse on sodomy and homoeroticism. And then you have the law, and the law, it's harsh, especially in Venice. It could be burned. A sodomite could be burned. In Florence, actually, the law was less harsh, and there was a lot of people were convicted, but the penalties were not so terrible like in Venice, theoretically. Okay, so you have this divide, and then. You see in text like comedies, for instance, that the divide is somehow bridged because you have heterosexual plots, okay, in a lot of comedies. And then in the middle of this, I'm calling them heterosexual plot because there is the final marriage, the man and the woman, the love, etc. But then in the middle, there are instances where sodomy and homoerotic practices or attraction between men is used to, interestingly, restore order that was destroyed before by the happenings of the comedy. It's a very interesting way that somehow sodomy is used to restore order in heterosexual plots. This is just an example to say that I think when we analyze these topics, you have to be very careful. We have to be very careful not to see only one side of the divide, like the law and the clerics, Savonarola, or the moralist attacking sodomy or homoerotic practices, and then you see this other side of the humanistic, writers or the comedies, and you think, okay, well. How is this be? The thing is, when sodomy and homoerotic practices fit somehow into a social order, it was normal, it was considered normal for youthful people to engage in male-male sex practices until they were 18 or 20 years old, first as passive partners, then as active. That was considered pretty much normal. I'm not saying that you could be convicted, but if you read Sanudo, the Diaries in Venice, or Priuli, they say, oh, this is a domestic vice. everybody practices this, and only people without money are convicted. So when you read outside the law or the official pronouncement against sodomy, and you see that homoerotic practice can fit into a certain order, social order, actually you see that there is not such a negative view. And this mixed view, which is mixed exactly, is what you see in the comedies, because you see the very negative portrayal of sodomite teachers because they are authoritarian, they impose their power on the students, and so they are really depicted in a negative way. But then you have this positive, portrayal of Marescalco, Aretino, Il Candelaio, some characters in Candelaio di Bruno, or other less known comedies that I talk about in my book. I think we have to look at sodomy not just in one source, in several sources, and see if it fits into the social system. And actually, if it stayed into these parameters, youthful, male sex, that was fine. The problem was when you had people 50 or 60 years old or 40 who should be simple, fathers and husbands, and they are still looking for other men, or worse, as the Venetian government says in one part, they are passive partners of younger people. So that's why I think we have to be, careful when we...
Do you see in these many comedies that you've written that the stereotype of the Counter-Reformation as this dark age doesn't really work with what we read? It's just simply a discriminant that we put there because it's convenient when you try to teach students about literary culture and social culture.
You are very right, and this is very important. When I started reading the comedies, I knew this paradigm, and actually I've read the Louise Club and all she writes about the commedia grave, the serious comedy that she sees as different from the comedy of the first half of the 16th century, more serious, more grave, she says, because the themes are more religious and the women are less aggressive. And partially, you have some comedies where you see this, but I don't believe actually in this very rigid paradigm, because many of these comedies actually that I talk about in my first chapter, especially cross-dressing, many of those comedies were written at the middle of the 16th century, or even 20, 30 years later, La Pellegrina and many others, because this was the imposing view, the view of the church, the view of the moralist, the view of the writers that actually made into the canon and directed somehow the circulation of the discourse, and this was the dominant discourse. This was taken up by a lot of literary critics who said, we have more, transgressive comedies, more transgressive literature. But after that, actually, there is this, the moralists say that the young virgin should never appear on stage. Well, we have a lot of young virgins here who are not virgins at all, actually, because they get pregnant during the, the plot. And then this is also so interesting. When you see all these comedies at the end, when these women cross-dress as men, and they do all sorts of things, not really bad, but they get pregnant, they frequent bordelli, houses of bad reputation, they go about, they make money, do business, go to school, they do all these things. But nobody says anything against them. So none of these women is ever punished for being cross-dress, and so we need the happy ending, even though the happy ending is that too a little, you have to look more closely at the happy ending. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.